In our series, Teaching Slavery in America, we analyze the gaps in America's education system that have not allowed many of us to learn the full scope of America's history. In part 3, we focused on parents. In part 4, we'll conclude our discussion talking about teachers. We've done a lot of talking about what they should or should not do. But the Southern Poverty Law Center researched what exactly is going on in a variety of classrooms. The SPLC Director of Teaching Tolerance, Maureen Costello, explains how they got to the root of the issues many teachers face when they take this on. Before I dive into all of this, can you explain what Teaching Hard History is?
Sure. Teaching Hard History is a project aimed at changing the way we teach about the racial history of this country, and particularly in this case about American slavery. We want to tell the truth about slavery, but in a way that makes it very, very clear that enslaved people resisted their experience, they had agency, they were creative, and that doesn't make Black children feel victimized anew by learning about slavery. And yet at the same time, we want people to understand how foundational this institution was for the entire country.
I'm especially interested in the people that you spoke to that are in classrooms, the teachers and the students, and how aware they were of what they weren't aware of. What did you learn from them?
I think that's a really great way of putting it, because it turns out that they were not aware of what they were not aware of.
Okay.
What we found was that teachers, first of all, really wanted to do a good job. But when we probed a little bit deeper and we said, well, okay, what do you like teaching about this, or what do you not like teaching about it? We uncovered a lot of what I would call unease, just nervousness around how the subject would land with students. In having these conversations with teachers, we sort of unpack these often hesitations that they don't even acknowledge or aren't conscious of, and help them think about ways to overcome them. The other issue is that we often think of these things as in the past, and many teachers would like to believe that they're in the past as well. But slavery is hard to teach about because the racial issues are still very present.
And the Teaching Hard History report presents ways for teachers and school districts to evaluate those lessons that they're doing. Can you explain a few of those ways?
We tend to teach what we learned. So most of us learned that slavery was primarily a Southern institution. And to the extent that it existed in the North, it was pretty much abolished shortly after the Declaration of Independence and the independence of the United States. What we don't teach is the extent to which the entire Northern economy was fueled by slavery. So we really are trying to make the point that, you learned that this was a Southern institution, but guess what? It was a national institution. Another is that, the common understanding is that when we ask who freed enslaved people, is either, it was Lincoln with the Emancipation Proclamation, or it was the 13th Amendment. Well, legally, the 13th Amendment is true. But in fact, there's a huge history of enslaved people liberating themselves during the Civil War. So really, a lot of this has been about drawing the curtain back on the stories we don't tell. And what I've found in doing trainings with teachers is that they didn't know this, or they didn't see this history in this light before, but once they do, it changes the game.
Now we want to get practical. I asked Maureen what educators, school districts, and communities can do to put change in motion, and what resources are out there right now to help make those things happen. How important are materials and resources like the ones that you create? How important are those for educators who genuinely want to do better?
They're incredibly important, but it's also about making them accessible and putting them into a framework, like here's how they fit into your state history course. Educators are so overwhelmed, so you can't just say, look, go into that virtual room and there are 10,000 resources and find the ones you want. It's really important to be able to say, here's a menu of items. for this particular topic that you might be able to use.
What do you say to educators who come up to you with their hands up, like, where do I start? What is step one? How can I just get the ball rolling?
Step one is probably getting together with, if you're a high school teacher, for instance, the other teachers in your department. Or if you're in a school district, working with other teachers in the district to say, let's work together and figure out how we can align this to the curriculum we have to teach already. And this sometimes took 6 months or it took a year. But sat down and said, okay, here's specific places where we can make changes. Here's how we can align our curriculum. And then share that with the teachers in your school or in your district. Do it together.
And I'm curious about state curriculums. In the Teaching Hard History research, what did you guys find about those state standards and how they match up to what you think students should be learning?
State standards in this area are extremely weak. First of all, very few state standards really talk a lot about content. They tend to be very, very broad. I would say state standards are like the floor for the most part. And remember too that most states are local control states. So even to the extent that that state may have a suggested set of standards, curriculum decisions are often made at the district or the school level.
When you talk about legislation, it doesn't necessarily seem like changing laws is what the meat of change is going to be in classrooms. So you don't necessarily need to be calling your representatives or your senators trying to make a change.
You don't have to, but it certainly wouldn't hurt. There are lots of states that have passed laws mandating Holocaust education, for instance. Several states now have looked at requiring African American history and specifically requiring a better history of American slavery. So I really think that you're better off calling your local school district and saying, what are you doing to improve this education? The other way we're looking at it is that this is kind of multi-pronged. We want to have teachers and schools change the way they teach, but we also want textbooks to change. So I think that is going to be a next step of publishers looking closely at their materials, at states looking at their standards, but also the work really has to happen at the local level.
Starting at the local level is the secret ingredient she says any of us can use. And eventually you'll work your way to experts like Dr. Hassan Kwame Jeffries or Khalil Gibran Muhammad, who can support and advise schools on how to get a workflow going like the Olentangy Local School District. Across all 4 parts of this series, that district and an array of experts have taught us why teaching a well-rounded history should be a priority, what techniques to use to change current curriculums, including reaching beyond textbooks, how imperative it is to keep parents informed since their reactions are only based on their own education and experiences. And lastly, to use the resources in your area to implement the necessary changes. Both Costello and Muhammad stress it's less about crafting laws or new state standards and more about engaging individual school districts and educators. I hope you've learned something or picked up a tool that can help spark change in your community or school. To share this series, you can find it anywhere you watch Newsy on demand, on your favorite streaming device, or go to newsy.com and search Teaching Slavery in America.